Well, thank you, George, and thank you, everybody, for coming out this evening. It's late afternoon for some, evening for me. I usually go to bed by 9 o'clock, so this is getting very late for me, but I'll see what I can do. When I first got this, I have to do an inaugural address, and I'm thinking to myself, am I supposed to be outlining foreign policy and immigration quotas and figuring out how to fix the economy, or what exactly am I supposed to be doing with this thing? And always thinking of inauguration as firsts, and Tanya gave an explanation that it's my first public lecture as full professor, but I've kind of worked that into this talk in spite of the title, looking at it a little bit biographical, to talk about my journey, how I got here, what has happened over the years. George has filled some of that in because I've known him for quite a while, but also trying to think of, maybe a little bit of education along the way, maybe a little bit of entertainment along the way, maybe a little bit of provoking thought. And I know I shouldn't be doing that kind of thing at 6 o'clock in the evening or at this stage, but it provoked a lot of thought in me. I think I spent more time fussing and fiddling about what I was going to do in this lecture than I did in preparing for my PhD dissertation. And I prepared slides, which if you have taken a class with me, you're going, what? There are slides? I'm usually a chalkboard type person and like to do things the old-fashioned way. I'm actually quite a technophobe in some ways, but I figured, no, we better have some slides, and most of them, just so you're comforted right off the bat, most of them are pictures. Okay, so a few key words, but pictures, just so it'll help clarify things. And Nicole came to my office to take a picture for the poster for this presentation, and in some ways it's actually quite reflective of what's going on, because behind me there are various diplomas and certificates, and you go, oh yes, there you go, accomplishment and time spent attaining rank and getting these various accolades, etc. But then there's a picture on the right of horses, and one wonders, what do horses have to do with anything? Well, I picked this up in China last year because I liked the horses. It was only when I got back here that I looked in the upper left-hand corner to see what it said there in Chinese. Now, if you know anything about Chinese, you know that more than half of the time you cannot take Chinese literally. It always means something else, particularly when you see 4 characters. Okay? There's a whole book in 4 characters. Idioms in Chinese, there are catalogs of these things, thousands of these things in Chinese that basically showed up in ancient texts and in well-known texts, and they're used to tell a whole story in 4 words. So what we have here is Ma Dao Chung Gong, okay, which sounds like it has something to do with horses. Horses arriving. No, it doesn't. It means, in contrast to what's on the left side of the picture, may you achieve immediate success. Trust me. Okay? Full professor, not something that you achieve immediately. If I look back at my history and say, okay, how long did this take? In a literal kind of way. Obviously, it took a lifetime, but how long did it take in a literal kind of way? So I'm going to count the beginning as when I entered a PhD program. From entering the PhD program to attaining full professor took 25 years. Okay? Not immediate success. Okay? Just saying. Okay? All right? Now, I did lots of different things during those 25 years, as George alluded to. I In fact, one of the highlights of this is at the end of December, I will have been a full-time faculty member in the School of Business, and that milestone will represent the longest in my life that I have ever been in the same job. Okay? Not necessarily the same employer, but the same job. I can't even tell you how many jobs I've had at this institution, how many jobs I had at the University of Toronto, how many jobs I had before that. But this will actually be the longest I've ever done one thing, which is why I applied to take a sabbatical in January, because I was getting a little anxious about, oh, what am I going to do? So I need a bit of a break to figure out what I'm going to do to come back after that. But it's the longest I've ever spent doing anything. So I was struck by kind of the irony of this juxtaposition, if you like, in terms of immediacy. Now, I say it was a 25-year journey, but one of the tricks with this is it didn't start as early as it does with many others. I spent my 20s and 30s doing pretty much anything and everything that my heart desired. I spent a great deal of time in school. I spent a great deal of time in industry. I cooked. I played music. I went off on wild adventures that I barely can remember. And in my late 30s, I ended up on the farm thinking to myself, what am I going to be when I grow up? Right? At this point, I much preferred the company of horses, and in many ways still do prefer the company of horses, but this was just the life that I had. That's about the only picture I could find of myself from farm days. We didn't take a lot of pictures back then. There were no iPhones and all the rest of these other kinds of things. But I was stuck with this kind of, what am I going to do with my life? What am I going to be? All right? What am I, what should be next? And in all my misadventures in my 20s and 30s, I had always been in a situation where I was teaching, training. I'd start something and they'd say, oh, can you help people to do this? Can you just stand up and give this? Can you teach us about that? And I figured, well, you know what? Walks like a duck, talks like a duck, might as well, be a duck. So I decided, okay, let's go off and be an academic, or at least try to be an academic. I didn't have at that time a good explanation or a good resource to help me out, but Emily Wapnick this year, 2017, came out with this marvelous book, How to Be Everything. Okay? A guide for those who still don't know what they want to be when they grow up. All right? So happily I can say, now I can explain away those early decades of my life by saying, oh yes, but until this point I was a multi-potentialite. All right? And as George alluded to, I still seem to be one. It's just the way it is. But she helped me out because she says, here's what multi-potentialites are good at. Feel good about yourself because you are good at idea synthesis, taking things from many different areas, many different disciplines, many walks of life, bringing them all together. You learn rapidly. Okay, George thinks I learned Arabic in my sleep. It wasn't quite in my sleep, but I've always had this thing for language, and I just say, okay, this is the next language, let's go. As long as there's a context or a reason to learn it, I have this pathological thing of wanting to learn it. I can't help it. It's just the way I am. And then adaptability. I'll teach this, I'll go here, I'll go there, I'll do that, I'll try anything, basically. Well, not quite, but I'll try almost anything. I can't swim, so that's off the table. But other than that, I'm pretty game to do anything. But I was very happy to kind of see this thing as an explanation, if nothing else. But it did leave me in a quandary because fine, I had made the decision that being an academic was a good thing, and so I had to pick a PhD program. I already had a couple of degrees, and fine, I knew I could get into a PhD program, but I couldn't figure out what PhD program to go into. Theology seemed to be the obvious thing because I had a facility in ancient languages, and I always loved those things, but no one hires theologians. All right? Then I thought of economics because I had taken a lot of economics, but I didn't believe anything that they said. So that troubled me. All right? And so I fished around. I went and talked to a philosophy department. I talked to the comparative literature department at the University of Toronto because I thought that was a good way to use the language facility. And then I went and talked to a sociology department. I went, aha! Now we've got something here. This is something I can work with. Why sociology? Well, sociologists make an assumption. They make an assumption that our very existence is a social existence. So we are not the single rational mind of psychology and economics. We are social beings. We gain our identity. We build who we are and who we work with through interaction with others. This appealed to me. They also focus on two questions. How or why is there social order, as opposed to not? And how do things change? Or why do they change? And I said, boy, well, I got a lot of experience at this. Okay, all right. So this is something I can really sink my teeth into. All right. But I had also read a great deal of Max Weber. Max Weber was writing about 100 years ago, 110 years ago. He wrote politics, he wrote economics. He was also one of the few people who wrote about religion without being religious. So he wrote about the importance of religion as a system of knowledge, as something that gave order to societies, as something that drove the economy. He's famous for his book, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. All right? And if anyone doesn't think that it is the Protestant interpretation of Christianity that created and drives modern capitalism, they haven't read anything, all right, about capitalism. That is the main driving force of the modern capitalist society, and you know it is for sure because the Americans deny it so vehemently, okay? Right? You know something's true the more they say it isn't, all right? He also gave us our first real explanation, detailed exploration of bureaucracy, all right? A subject that in academia is very close to our hearts, okay? Why write a 5-page report when it can be 500 pages? Why only have one meeting when you can have 10, okay? Famous paper that I often teach to students in OB class is, you know, academics are different from others in that they have solutions where there are no problems. Okay? Right? The other interesting thing that Weber did in writing about bureaucracy and talking about the way that society is ordered, he came from a very well-read, very well-respected intellectual family. His father had an amazingly large library. He wrote a book on the literary class in China at the end of the Qing dynasty, so the 19th century. All right? Wrote a book about mandarins, all right? You may have heard this word Mandarin, oranges. We refer to Chinese language as Mandarin. It's not a Chinese word at all. It's from Latin, and it was used by Portuguese Jesuits when they went to China to describe the educated literary class that basically were the intellectual leaders of the country, but also ran all of the bureaucracies, okay? Mandarin, very simple. Mandara in Latin, it's where we get our word mandate. Okay? All right? Emperors in China had the mandate of heaven. The literary class in China had the mandate to run everything. It's basically that simple. So it kind of got my first introduction to things Chinese through reading Max Weber, but it sent me off in the direction of doing sociology as a PhD program and hopefully eventually to teach it. And as George alluded, I actually got my position here originally as a sabbatical replacement and then on faculty teaching sociology. And I mentioned that now this teaching stint now is the longest I've ever done at one thing. The sociology teaching stint lasted 3 years before I got booted upstairs, as it were, to take on more and more administrative duties and taught less and less. What's the next slide? Oh, yeah. Language, I've already mentioned language. I've mentioned order and change. The top title is the title of my master's thesis, which now is as obscure as the day is long. The use of the word hypostasis in the theological tractates of Nicias, Manlius, Severinus, Boethius. I always have to throw in a good Greek word when George is in the room. Okay. Hypostasis, just for your edification, hypostasis originally in ancient Greek was used to describe the dead yeast cells and the scum that would be left at the bottom of a wine vat after you had poured off the good stuff, as it were. This word was co-opted by Christian theologians to talk about after you take Jesus and scrape away all the humanity, what's left of God in Jesus is referred to as the hypostasis. All right? I loved words. I really didn't care what it was about. I was just fascinated by the way that words change meaning, move through different contexts, and build that way. Story. The very first talk that I gave way back in the early 90s at then UCCB, when we would give one of these talks, it would be on an 8x10 sheet of paper and it would be stuck by the mail room so that as people came to pick up their mail, we actually got mail in those days, when they picked up their mail, they would see what talk was going to be given. The very first talk I gave here was on soteriology. And George, being Greek, was standing at the mailbox one day, and I happened to be there, and he said, you know, I'm the only other person in this building who knows what that word means. And so with hypostasis. Second thesis title, my PhD thesis, an inquiry into the generic social processes of science. Okay? Taking that idea that we construct our organizations, we construct our institutions, we construct our meaning systems through language and through basic social processes, that no matter whether it's science, religion, an organization, it doesn't matter. The processes are generic. We learn a vocabulary, we manipulate the language, we interact, we try to construct and deconstruct what we're saying to each other, and that's what those institutions actually are at the end of the day. Okay? So I felt, in some comforting way, that even though it looked like I had hopped around and done a bunch of things, I was actually still doing exactly the same thing as I had started out to do, trying to understand how meaning is created through language by different social groups. That's kind of my explanation of what I do on a day-to-day basis. So that left me in a quandary as to what to talk about for this talk, okay? Other than kind of giving you the biographical piece. So like any sensible social scientist, I went to Facebook. I decided to crowdsource, okay? All right. What should I talk about? All kinds of interesting topics popped up. Obviously, topics related to religion, you know, climate change, all kinds of things like that. Millennials and the future of organizational leadership. Great thesis topic for somebody. Really nice topic. Okay, I thought it was pretty good. Zhang Weiwei, I have to mention Zhang Weiwei. Zhang Weiwei is a recently published, at least, or prolifically published commentator on China's future. He's written several books in English. And he's a brilliant kind of guy, and I actually would have liked to talk about it, but I'm only 1.5 books through his corpus, so perhaps we'll get to that one in the spring or sometime later. My daughter-in-law, Carol, said, I was going to suggest cake, but then I saw how serious everybody else's response was, and I figured, that might not be the best idea. I think she thinks that she sees me as a pastry chef who just kind of moonlights as an academic. I think, you know, it's just one of those things. And my daughter-in-law, Lisa, who I think, you know, read a bunch of the other ones first, said, well, talk about something about how, things now are so much different than they were in the past, or how we haven't learned the lessons of history. So, both very good contributions. But and then a friend of mine in Australia, Quran scholar and Muslim, Selimovic and Kadara, Modern Projections of a Religious Past in Communist Europe. I got a sneaky suspicion that's his PhD thesis and he's trying to get a little help or something like that. I mean, that's way too specific. I didn't even know who these guys were, okay? I can tell you who they were. Selimovic was Serbian, Kadara was Albanian, both novelists who wrote the history of their respective countries, their nations, in terms of that clash or supposed clash between religious heritage and a new form of governance or a form of governance that, in a sense, outlawed or at least tried to downplay the religious significance. So a very interesting topic, but certainly not one that I was going to tackle at this point. So I get an email from Nicole, who's hiding up there at the back. I need a title by Monday because I need to make a poster. Okay, all right. Still no idea what I was going to talk about, but I figured I've got to have a title, got to start somewhere. So on the weekend when, I was reading Buddhist Economics by Claire Brown. And this book is quite a fascinating book. She identifies income inequality and climate change as the two greatest problems facing the world at this time. I may generalize that to say equality period and climate change, but she's on to something. But in the introduction to her book, she says there are three things preventing us from actually dealing with these problems: busyness, denial, ignorance. Title. Okay, all right. Had no idea what I was going to say. I certainly wasn't going to come in and talk about Buddhist economics, but beautiful title, okay? Figured I could get away with anything, all right? Talk with this kind of title. Very recent book, actually a very good book. Highly recommend it. She got her title, okay, the title Buddhist Economics, from Schumacher's Small is Beautiful, okay? He coins this phrase to describe a different kind of world, and he really defines it as economics as if people mattered. Okay? Huge break for the standard economic literature and the economic approach to things, but that's the definition of sociology in many ways. Economics as if people mattered. And that certainly gets to where I'm coming at in a number of things. Now, I'm going to take you back in history even further to 1675, to Sir Isaac Newton in a letter to Hooke, who said, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulder of giants." Okay? I told you where I got my title. I told you where she got her title. This is the academic way. Citation. Giving credit where credit is due. All right? But there's another message hidden in what Newton had to say, and it's humility. You know so little. And in fact, in my old age, I've discovered I know less than I ever did. All right? And a lot of that has to do with understanding how much is out there, how much people know, how much every individual contributes to the corpus of knowledge and to what we consider to be certainty and truth. And so there's a certain need to take on this humility even at the rank of full professor. In fact, probably I would argue more so at the rank of full professor. Okay? Have to try a little harder. Okay, so let's get to our topic. Before they throw me out. Busyness. So this is the line directly from Buddhist economics where she talks about busyness. And you know, really we don't have time to do all the things that we think we need to do, or that get created for us by others and meet the demands. And as she says here, they suck away our energy, they drain everything from us. All right? And yes, the whole I've got to do this, I've got to do this, I've got to do this is a problem in society. Something that I tell my OB students, stop making to-do lists. If you want to feel better about yourself, if you actually want to progress in life, start making done lists. What have you accomplished? Don't think of your life as I haven't. Think of your life as I have. And it will change your perspective completely. Okay? I see busyness. Yes, I agree with these ideas around busyness, but I see a couple of other components in busyness. And one of them is time. All right? Our perception of time. We have a very short attention span, and it's getting shorter all the time. I've always had a short attention span, as you can tell, all right? But it's getting to be epidemic in proportions, all right? Everything is abbreviated, everything is sound bites and 140 characters, and here's a snapshot of what I ate, you know, at dinner this evening, and then you're on to something else. We're trapped in this ever more compressed view of time, but time never goes faster or slower. Time just goes. You can't alter time. You can only alter your perception and the way you think in time. And I always love this expression, killing time. You can't kill time. Time is killing you. Okay? All right? Okay? The real message in here is it's not how much time you spend. It's how you spend the time. Okay? And it's learning how to optimize, how to use time in a way. And I bring in this idea of ultradian rhythms. Okay? Ultradian rhythms refer to the useful time segments within a day. Okay? On average, okay, people cannot concentrate for more than 90 minutes, all right, on any one thing. Okay? Some people can stretch that to 2 hours. I'm really hoping I'm going to get to like maybe 50 minutes one of these days. I'm just like, right? I'm really short attention span. All right? But if you're pushing all the time, all right? And then you say, well, I got to keep going. I got to keep going. I got to keep going. You pass that time. Your time efficiency drops so quickly. And all of a sudden you're caught up in I didn't get this done, I have to get this done. You're creating all this anxiety, all of this stress, and the quality of your work diminishes so rapidly. At 90 minutes, back off. Take 10 minutes, go outside, go for a walk, do something different. Doesn't mean fill your time with yet something else. It means unfill your time. Only for 10 minutes, a short break, and all of a sudden you're going to go, gee, I got all this done in the next 90 minutes. How did that happen? It usually takes me 2 or 3 days. All right? It's because you're pushing, push all the time. Stop pushing. Back off a little bit. You can learn Arabic in your sleep if you do that. Noise. This is our other big problem. Oh my God, I hate noise. Okay? Noise of all kinds, not just the stuff that goes in your ears, the stuff that goes in your eyes. We're always swiping and clicking and doing this. This is all noise. They're all distractions. They're all taking your productivity, your creativity away from you at this furious, furious pace. Okay? We think Steve Jobs gave us, fancy technology and conquered the world. Yeah, he conquered the world all right. He's turning us all into complete friggin' idiots who don't use this anymore, but we're sure good at this. One of these days our thumbs are going to be this long and our fingers will have, kind of fused so that we're basically like this, and that's all we can do. All right? It's ridiculous what's happened to us. We're afraid of quiet. When was the last time you actually experienced real quiet? No radio, no leaf blowers, no nothing, quiet. No hum of the highway, none of the rest of this kind of stuff. We're afraid of it. We're afraid of quiet. We're afraid of reflection because we think we should be doing. Okay? And it's because we don't know how to live in time. Okay? I would argue, just saying, you know, not drawing any conclusions here, right? Right? Get a garden, stick your hands in the soil, right? Sit in the kitchen window and watch the chickens, okay? It's the best, okay? I haven't seen a television show or a movie that matches 5 minutes of watching those idiots in the backyard, right? Okay? It's like, that's all there is. Why make it any more complicated? Denial. Learning how to live a meaningful life undermines many people's ideas of a successful life. Okay? Very specific here because she's focused on climate change. She mentions the idea that we think the free market and unending progress are the ultimate goals of the world. Well, I've got news for you. Free markets are a myth, okay? And our unending progress is actually taking us backwards at such a furious pace that I'm not sure we'll recognize ourselves in a generation. In my change management course, when I used to teach it in the mid-2000s, I used to say that by 2015 or 16, the population of the world will have decreased by 1/3. And I'm an optimistic kind of guy, okay? But I had this feeling that we are driving ourselves so crazy and driving ourselves to distraction and denying what was important, that we are going to allow for so many miniature factors to all add up and basically destroy the Earth as we know it. I might have to revise my time frame, but I still think we're in for a few shocks in the very near future. I see the problems in the world from the perspective of two tragedies. We have a tragedy of the commons. We have a tragedy of the anti-commons. Okay? When you have non-existent or ambiguous ownership, things will get overutilized. Okay? Garrett Hardin's famous paper from 1968 has generated all kinds of debate, and there are all kinds of pieces in it that you can pick apart. But if you take this underlying message, okay, that fisheries, air, water, you name it, it's a long, long list, okay? Creativity, play, okay? We don't allow children to play anymore. Don't buy them something, give them a cardboard box, okay? They'll find more ways to use that than they will with, okay, that's done, next, all right? The cardboard box will continue to fascinate, all right? The anti-commons, Michael Heller came up with this 30 years later, the idea that if you have multiple owners of something, or if you have overprotective ownership, as with intellectual property, you actually ensure that things will be underutilized. This is a problem with big pharma, this is a problem with the Monsantos of the world, this is a problem with a lot of different components. Okay? So I see this kind of play back and forth between the tragedy of the commons and the tragedy of the anti-commons, basically completely tearing down society, leading to the situation where we're going to run out of resources, bacteria and viruses are going to run rampant, and we're not going to be able to control them. There's just like, you just can't think of all the possible examples of these things. Financialization, one of my favorite things, using money and speculating on that to make more money. Money can't make money. Well, it does apparently, but in a real world, it shouldn't, in my opinion, okay? I mean, I even used to rail against people buying a house for the purpose of selling it to make money. I thought this was a tremendous social atrocity, let alone financialization, okay? What's the problem here? Well, to kind of hone in on what I'm supposed to be the expert at, leadership, I tell my students, and I'm sure George has heard this, I tell my students that I think leadership is complete nonsense, which is why George makes me teach it. Okay? All right? Leadership is a problem here. This is where the problem is, And I've kind of come up with a different way of looking at leadership that I'm working on. I mentioned I'm going on sabbatical in January. My sabbatical project is to look at the issues of leadership, particularly with respect to those two tragedies, from the perspective of new institutional economics. We're not going to go into a big economics lecture here, apart from saying new institutional economics says there are really three drivers in the economy. Okay? Property rights, fairly obvious. What does it mean to own something? What rights do you have as an owner? What rights do you have if you're not the owner? All right? Contracts. When you make a deal with someone, how do you enforce that contract? How do you ensure that that contract covers every potentiality? Obviously, you can't. All right? And then transaction costs, which are really a phenomenally interesting area. If you want to find something, want to buy something, want to do something, you've got to search. You've got to negotiate. You've got to wrangle for price. You have to do all of these different things that are involved in you being able to do that. And that's really what, in my mind, the whole leadership issue comes down to, is finding the right balance, finding the way to work within these three different approaches to get the right result. And many times it kind of narrows down to rules. Okay? The establishers of new institutional economics said it's the rules of the game, and organizations and everybody that's in it are the players, but it's the rules of the game. So I put another one of my favorite books up there just to emphasize the idea of rules, Robert's Rules of Order. I have been accused of writing it. I can assure you that I did not, but I can also assure you of something else. I'm one of the few people who has actually read it. Okay? It's just one of those catch-22s. But it really is a question of rules and learning what kinds of social rules we need to establish order, to take leadership, to resolve those kind of global issues, and to make sure that change doesn't run our lives for us. Ignorance. Waking up to the toll of the treadmill and to how our lifestyle is harming others and killing the planet. That pretty much describes it. How do we change? How do we escape ignorance? It really is a tremendously large problem. There's a lot of data out there. Some would even say there's a lot of information out there. None of that translates to knowledge unless you understand context, unless you have an application, unless you commit, unless you utilize that. Otherwise, it's just noise that's out there. Okay? This is one of my favorite examples of ignorance disguised as knowledge. Okay? Right? I won't try to I can't even sometimes get through reading it without tripping on the words. This is Donald Rumsfeld's attempt to explain how, when they got to Iraq, they discovered there were no weapons of mass destruction. You know, the logicians in the room, if there are any logicians in the room, will tell you when you have a 2x2 matrix, that means there are 4 possible values. But if you read that, you'll find that he only mentions 3. Okay? So he's pulling the wool over the eyes of the American public and basically trying to say that we have a knowledge problem. No, you don't. You have a value problem. Okay? You're exploiting the world. You wanted to go in there and beat up on Saddam Hussein, and you're just trying to make it look like it's a knowledge program. I usually refer to this as artificial intelligence. Okay, it's just the most ridiculous kind of example of things that you could ever run across. To my way of thinking, the real issue with ignorance is alliteracy. Okay? Alliteracy, as you can see, the state of being able to read, but no interest in doing so. Illiteracy is not the problem. We can teach people to read, but they've got to want to read. They've got to want to investigate, to search, to gain knowledge, to try to understand how to use that knowledge. In The Walrus, if anybody reads The Walrus, in March 2017 there was an article in The Walrus on alliteracy and how this is the new big problem. Well, the book on the right, somebody's right, you're right, the book on the right was written in 1989 by Max Dupree and mentions illiteracy at great length and is actually, Leadership is an Art. This is one of the only leadership books that I would ever recommend to anyone that they read. Okay? There's 40,000 of them on Amazon, and that's just this week. All right? They're all garbage. They're all feel-good books, and get you whooped up, and a week later you forget you read it and you need more sugar. All right? This is one of the few books on the subject that's actually worth reading, and he identifies illiteracy as a huge problem in organizations, as a huge problem in the way that we approach life, because people can get educated. They have the tools, they have the know-how, they just don't seem interested in doing so, which is a tremendously distressing kind of thing. You know, ask people, what was the last book you read? Or when did you last read a book? Oh, I'm too busy. Right? Busyness, denial, and ignorance, all in one statement. I personally love books. Just, you know, just saying. I'm sure you haven't caught on to that yet. So many books still published. Okay. Oh, books are, you know, going out of style. Everything's e-books, and we've got the internet, and we've got that. We don't need books. Yeah, you do. Plain and simple. And there's more books now being published. We got over ourselves. We got over the whole e-book thing. We got over many other things. Far more books are being published now. Love this idea of an anti-library. Okay. This word was coined by Nassim Taleb. Nassim Taleb wrote Black Swan, thank you. Couldn't think of it there for a minute. Wrote Black Swan. In Black Swan, he's talking about Umberto Eco. Umberto Eco had a library of more than 30,000 books. And when friends, scholars, visitors would come over and see his library, they would go, wow, how many of these have you read? Out the door, buddy. Not the point. Look at the world yet to be discovered. Okay? It's not what you've accomplished. It's not what you've read. It's what's there to be found out, to be explored. You should fill your house with books you haven't read because you just never know. Okay? You just never know when something might catch your interest. And he's got it at hand. Okay? We all can't, you know, we all don't have room for 30,000 books at our house. But the idea is you shouldn't think of books as, oh, I've read that. You should think of books as, that sounds interesting. I may at some point be interested in reading that. And then it's there. Okay? Don't think about accomplishment. Don't think about that aspect. Think about what is left to be explored. Maria Popova takes this idea and says we have to start thinking that we are anti-scholars. Now, when you see anti-scholar, you might think that means against scholarship. That's not what she's implying. What she's implying is don't think of yourself as an expert. Don't think of yourself as someone who has reached full professor and has learned all of these weird and wonderful things, but rather think of how that prepares you, how that equips you to do ever more explanation into new things that you may never have heard of before or things that will be invented tomorrow. All right? Be an anti-scholar. Be open to the possibilities. Don't rest on your laurels. Okay? Don't say, you know, it's like when you get the education, you say, I'm done school, so I'm done. Right? Or I've reached this rank, I'm done. I got tenure, I'm done. No, you're just starting. To get back to Inaugural. You're just opening up. You are just getting to that point where you can move into these other areas. It's time for us to become anti-scholars in an anti-library. Here's 2 books to put in your anti-library. I won't ask you if you've read them or not. I won't embarrass anyone. I love fiction. Particularly in a subject matter like leadership, you can actually learn more by reading good fiction than you can by reading learned tomes produced by all the leadership scholars in the world. All right? I just picked two, could have picked, you know, any number, just picked two. Orhan Pamuk's My Name is Red, okay? Historical crime novel. So, you know, interesting from that point of view. Set in 1591 in the Ottoman Empire, all right? But that's secondary to the real issue, okay? The real issue is each chapter is narrated by a different character. And so in reading it, you learn about how to look at the same event from multiple perspectives and how a different view on something can construct a more complete picture of something. Even inanimate objects get to narrate. The corpse gets to narrate. Right? A painting on the wall gets to narrate. The color red gets to narrate. A horse gets to narrate. All right? Because it's what would happen if we looked at the world in this way. How would it help us to understand social order if we approach things looking at it from this perspective? A tremendous mental exercise to help you develop your broader creative skills and appreciation of leadership. And then one of my absolute favorite books, If I Ran the Circus, by Dr. Seuss, not Seuss. He hated people calling him Dr. Seuss. His name was Seuss, Theodor Seuss Geisel. All right? He even wrote a poem about how to correctly pronounce his name. If I Ran the Circus is a story of young Maurice McGurk. Young Maurice McGurk decided that he wanted a circus, the Circus McGurkus, to be precise. And each day and each page, his ideas become ever more grandiose. Every new idea is bigger and more elaborate than the one that went before. But each day, poor Maurice, the thinker, does less and less of the actual work to make it happen. And as he goes through each new idea, oh, someone will do that. They won't mind. After all, they'll be part of the Circus McGurkus. Okay? Just an interesting lesson in excessive thinking, perhaps. If you insist on reading nonfiction, I'm just saying, okay? Little shameless self-promotion goes a long way, all right? But it's with a purpose. If busyness, denial, and ignorance are our problem, if we are trying to resolve those major social issues, how do we go about that? And I argue in governance and social leadership, we do that by building capacity to act, which is made up of knowledge, made up of perspective, made up of experience, all right? And really, just like new institutional economics would imply, it's a balance between structure and agency, between different rule sets, different ways of understanding, and our ability to actually express ourselves freely, to take initiative, to be individuals, but always in balance with those more structural elements. Won't go on at length about that because I'm sure you've all read it. This gets me back to Inaugural. Okay? Gets me back to the idea of coincidence and all kinds of interesting things that might go on. Wonderful, wonderful little one-liner there on the right. Without coincidences, there would be no stories. This is yet another one of those Chinese idioms. The three letters below there, three characters below there are not the idiom, rather they are the source of this, saying this is a classic of Chinese literature, the title of which usually gets translated as The Water Margin, but it is a Ming Dynasty classic. It's one of the four great novels of Chinese literature. The contents of it we're not so worried about, but what we are concerned with here is the idea of coincidences. And my life has just been full of all kinds of weird coincidences of running up against new things and meeting new people and saying, sure, let's try that, let's do that thing, let's see what happens. All right? And hence it builds a story, which I think is what a career, in a sense, should be about. So last year, I think, well, yeah, it was last year, sometime last year, last spring, Alan and Derek and I are in a van driving from Kaifeng to Zhengzhou in China, in Henan province. And we're looking out the window and there's lots of farmland and there's lots of things happening, and all of a sudden there's a cluster of high-rise buildings going up in the distance. And I was just like, wow, that's like we're in the farmland. All of a sudden there's a big cluster of things, and like the idiots that we are, what do? We count the cranes. We count the construction cranes, right? They're all very tightly compressed, and there happened to be 18 of them, all in this little cloud, like they were literally banging into each other. And I don't even remember who said it. I won't take credit where it's not due, but it's as if the three of us had this aha moment and went, what a great title for a book, 18 Cranes. Okay? Well, coincidentally, if you look on the other side of the slide, that is a piece of cloth about a foot square, okay, called a Mandarin square. You remember mandarins. This is a civil service rank badge. From 1391 to 1912, if you were a member of that literati, if you had mastered the 5 classics and the 4 books, you would write a regional exam, a provincial exam, and then a federal exam, and you would be promoted through the 9 ranks of the civil service and reach the equivalent of full professor. Okay? Don't you think full professors should start wearing these? Wouldn't that be? I think that'd be pretty awesome. Okay? The bird on the rank badge for the highest rank is a crane. Okay? So, new beginnings. I've got a sabbatical coming up. I'm still going to work on leadership and try to get all of that done. But because I've done something now for a full 5 years, I've decided my next big project, my next 5 years, is going to be consumed in writing a historical novel about late Ming Dynasty China and rising up through the civil service and spend my time just having a great time immersing myself in the pursuit of the crane. Thank you very much.